here in Rosehill Park, Sutton, to explore a piece of this country's heritage that people walk past every day and often fail to notice. The Milestone. This busy road looks like any other in this part of South London. However, it used to be one of the most important thoroughfares leading out of London. Today, its official name is the B2230, but soon after it was made, it was called the Brighton Road, which may give you a big clue as to why it was so important. It probably first started life as a simple farm track, as all this used to be fields and a few cottages, but in the early 1700s, it was constructed as a turnpike road. This meant local people joined together to improve a muddy, waterlogged track into a proper road surface. In return, they were allowed to charge a toll for the stretch of the road that they kept maintained. In its early days, this road was mostly used for moving cattle and other livestock to markets. An old phrase is Sutton for mutton, because of all the sheep on the farms here. Then came the era of the stagecoaches. Today, bus route 280 carries on the tradition. It closely follows the old turnpike road from Tooting to the start of the Belmont Downs at Belmont. The original road began in two places, London and Westminster Bridges. Maintaining a turnpike road meant placing marker stones showing the road's destinations every mile along it. Milestones were introduced on the Brighton Road between London and Belmont Downs in 1745. In 1755, 16 more stones were added to reach Reigate. A lot of these ancient stones still survive to this day along the length of the route, but I'll just be exploring a short but important section through Sutton to Belmont. This is the first of the stones we encounter as we arrive on the outskirts of central Sutton, and it is in good condition for something that's 265 years old. It has its own little area with railings and a flower bed. The inscription reads, 11 miles to the Royal Exchange and 10 miles to Whitehall. Why the distances are measured from these places as opposed to the bridges they were laid from is a mystery. Put a note in the comments section below if you know the answer. There is also another inscription on the side, 1755 at the bottom, which is not the year the stone was first laid. I suspect the original stone was destroyed by some of the many people who opposed the turnpike system. They didn't like having to pay for a road that they thought was a natural right of way. Milestones, it should be a mile that way to the next one. But how good were those 18th century engineers who laid them? After all, they didn't have digital technology and computers to survey the land. So I'm going on a journey to walk between them to see if they really are milestones. To record the distance I walk, I will use this simple app. Now, the road we're following was originally called the Brighton Road, but why Brighton? In 1782, the Prince of Wales, who had become George IV, was 20 years old and discovered the delights of the seaside at Brighton. So he built a mock palace there called the Pavilion, and regularly started making the 52-mile journey between his proper palace in London and the one in Brighton. Overnight, the little fishing village became the most fashionable place to be, and stagecoaches started running regular services there, which is why the next stop on our route is important. This is Angel Hill, and that, over there, is the parish church of Ben Hilton. It's mentioned in a book from 1892 all about the old turnpike road, course The Brighton Road by Charles G. Harper. On the fringe of that town, at the discreet residential suburb of Ben Hilton, is a scenic surprise in the way of a deep cutting in the hilly road. Spanned by a footbridge, graced with trees and neighboured by the old Angel Inn, Angel Bridge, as it is called, is a pretty spot. The rise thus cut through was once known as Bean Hill, and on that basis was fantastically reared the name of Ben Hilton. One cannot but admire the ingenuity of it. As you can see, this area hasn't changed much in nearly 130 years. Local legend states that the area around here was once very boggy and like a swamp, so George IV ordered the cutting to be made so he didn't have to wait around while his horses plodded through the mud. In fact, the cutting was made a lot earlier, in the 1770s, as part of the turnpike measures. But it's true that this was a swampy area, so bad in fact that there was a cholera outbreak here in the 1890s. We're now a few hundred metres the other side of Angel Hill, by Sutton's old village green, and here behind me is another reminder of George IV, the now abandoned and sadly soon to be demolished Prince Regent pub, named after George before he became king. If it wasn't for those construction site boards, you would still be able to see the remains of the old coaching yard. This was where coaches coming down from London could stop. The horses would be tired by now, especially after fighting their way through the quagmire on Angel Hill, and so could be changed for fresh ones. Or they could have had their shoes changed by a blacksmith operating round the back. Meanwhile, the passengers could enjoy a rest from the weather and the jolts of the journey, or maybe a stroll here on the green before heading off again for Brighton. But as an indication of how busy this route would become, there were two other places coaches could stop, as we'll find out later on our journey. Let's carry on to the next stone. So, I've now walked 1.6 kilometres from the last stone, which is equal to 1 mile. So the stones are still in their original locations 270 years later, and 18th century surveying methods were accurate by today's standards. This stone is the most famous of them all in Sutton, sitting as it does in the middle of the busy High Street, at the end of Ben Hill Avenue. The inscription on the front is slightly different to the Rosehill Park stone. The locations are the other way round, which further backs up the evidence that the Rosehill one is newer. It reads 11 miles to Whitehall and 12 miles to the Royal Exchange. The date on the side is illegible, and it's a very weathered stone. It's quite a surprise that it has managed to survive intact for so long. I wonder what other uses this stone has been put to in its long history beside this busy road. There's nothing to show it today, but this was the location of the second coaching inn in the Sutton High Street part of the Brighton Road. Where these shops are today used to stand the Greyhound Inn. There are a couple of theories on why it was called by that name. Some stagecoach companies operated special fast services that tried to cut the journey time to a minimum. This meant only stopping at inns long enough to change horses and go. They were known as flying coaches, or greyhounds, after the swift-running dogs. Perhaps if you wanted longer breaks, you took the slower service and stopped at the Prince Regent, but if you wanted a fast ride, you stopped briefly at the Greyhound. Another theory is that greyhounds were short hop carts that passengers used to get around difficult obstacles. Some historians think that coach passengers would stop here at the Greyhound Inn, where they'd change for one of these short hop carriages which could take them up the steep hill. We'll pick up the story of what happened to them at the top when we get there on our journey. Whatever Greyhound meant, the area around the Greyhound Inn is the oldest part of the town. Near here have been found some of the remains of the earliest houses, and just over the road was the earliest shop. A few metres away was the first police station, and right behind me happens to be another old shop, Pearson Cycles, which is the oldest bicycle shop in the world. The yard at the back is still the same as when it started life as a blacksmith's. I'm here at the top of the steep hill of Sutton's High Street. This was the site of the Cock Inn, the most important coaching inn on this stretch of the Brighton Road and for miles around. There's been an inn on this site at least since the 17th century, but the first coaching inn was constructed in the early 1700s. It was primarily made of wood with 3 stories. It was demolished and rebuilt in 1898, but was finally demolished for good in 1961. Historians think that it was called the Cock Hotel because of its use of cock horses, another name for the working horses which would just pull passenger coaches up the hill before they were changed for longer distance ones. An important part of the Cock Inn still survives today. It's the lovely old sign in the middle of the road, which usually stands as a famous local landmark and symbol of the town of Sutton. Unfortunately, it's currently been taken away for cleaning, but I'm looking forward to it returning and looking as good as new. The hotel was at an important crossroads where 2 turnpike roads met. The Brighton Road, which I've been following, and the Yule Road, which ran from Carshalton in the east to Yule in the west. At this crossroads is where the toll gate or bar for the Brighton Road was located, and next to it, the small toll house, where travellers would have to pay their fee to use the road. The original location for the toll gate and house is disputed. Some say it was here, where Clark's shoe shop now is, just opposite the road from Pearson's Cycles. This theory is backed up by the lovely ancient bits of wall you can see behind the modern walls of the shop itself. In 1772, however, the gate was here. An interesting double gate that served both Brighton Road and Yule Road was erected here for £82, the equivalent of a whopping £13,539 today. The stagecoach business really started to take off from 1760. Before this, London to Brighton stagecoaches used a route further west, going via Croydon, Godstone, East Grinstead and Lewes. But after a new tunnel in Reigate shortened the route, they started to travel through Sutton. Records of a stagecoach journey written in 1801 sound fantastic. It left the city at 7 a.m, took breakfast at our Cock Hotel at 9 a.m. Next, a stop at the Tangier in Banstead for a glass of Miss Gill's famous elderberry wine. Luncheon was taken at Reigate. Next, a 2-hour halt at Stapleford Common for a famous rabbit pudding and black cherries. At Handcross they had a drop of smuggled liquor, a cup of tea at Patcham, and supper at Brighton at 7 p.m. Compared to a modern rail journey, it sounds wonderful. Strange then that it was the opening of the London to Brighton Railway that crippled these services, though they were still running as late as 1893. Our journey hasn't finished yet. The Cock Hotel marks exactly half a mile until the next stone, so on we go. Here we are, 1.67 kilometres from the last stone, exactly a mile. This is the cleanest and largest stone we have seen so far. It gives us an idea of the kind of bold landmarks the milestones must have looked like as the stagecoaches galloped by on their way to Brighton. The inscription on the stone is different to the last one. 13 miles from the Standard at Cornhill. If you know what that was or why, comment below. The road is incredibly straight here. It's almost like I can see where the next stone should be, so let's keep going. So here we are at the final stone, after much less than a mile of walking. I've walked just over a kilometre, that's much less than a mile. It's strange that this final stone should break the chain of miles. It is barely visible. It's much smaller than the others and hidden away, under a wall and behind a bush. A little secret tucked away. This all tells me that the stone has been moved at some point from its original position. The inscription is also too worn to read. This stone is even mentioned in the Brighton Road by Charles Harper in 1892, although today it doesn't fit his description much. Leaving Sutton town, as we call it nowadays, the road proceeds to climb steadily uphill to the modern suburb of Belmont, where stands an old but very well cared for milestone, setting forth that it is distant 13 miles from the Standard in Cornhill, London, 1745. From the Royal Exchange the same distance, and from Whitehall 12 miles and a half. The neighbourhood is now particularly respectable, but I grieve to say that the spot is marked on the maps of 1796 as Little Hell, which seems to indicate that the character of the people living in the three houses apparently then standing here would not bear close inspection. Well, with that shocking revelation, I've come to the end of my journey along the Old Turnpike Road, and I've also literally come to the very edge of London. But the road keeps going on, and who knows what lies further down it. Perhaps it passes by somewhere you know. I've really enjoyed my trip through Sutton today, and I think I agree with the Victorian Charles Harper. With the angel placed at one end, and this vestibule into an inferno situated at the other, Sutton seems to have been accorded exceptional privileges. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed and learned something from this, and I'll see you in another video.